Regular listeners know that I've tracked the evolution of General Motors over these last several years with awe and respect. GM is making the pivot to electric power in ways that even its founder, William C. Durant, would respect. As Durant made the pivot from his horse-drawn carriage company to self-powered gasoline cars, GM has embraced the coming EV revolution by becoming a facilitator to others. In industry lingo, a Tier 1 supplier of basic electronic components and hardware designed to support a variety of electric-powered vehicles and small motor appliances, like lawnmowers and weed whackers. Now the automaker is venturing into the fast-growing EV conversion market. Yeah, dramatic pause for a reason. GM is actually creating a quote-unquote crate motor, or more like a kit, for folks to take to be announced certain vintage GM vehicles and converting them from internal combustion engines to electric power, which means more in case of what we call a resto mod, where you take a vintage vehicle, fill it full of modern components, and it's kind of your twist on that vehicle as opposed to a full vintage restoration. What excites me about this thing is, as I've been saying before, and I'm going to say it again, GM's approach. GM has said, you know what? We're going to do this smart. We're going to invest the money for the basic components and make them available to everybody, which means the more people buy from us, the better we'll get at making these components. Guess what? In the United States, by the way, not in China, right here, which will create jobs, which will create an infrastructure of parts and service, and will save billions of dollars if you're an EV manufacturer, because you don't have to recreate the wheel, you don't have to create the roller skate, you don't have to create the controller, you don't have to create all the other components required to run an EV. You can spend your money differentiating and actually coming up with really cool applications based on this stuff. GM's going to commoditize, the batteries, the controllers, and all that stuff I mentioned earlier. With that as a commodity and an affordable price as a piece of your vehicle, then you can concentrate on the whole experience. What does it look like? What can it do? Maybe you come up with a software that makes it perform in different ways, because now you can concentrate on the differentiation as opposed to all the hard, expensive component development, which, engines and transmissions back in the day would require.
Some people are going to say, I trust GM as far as I can throw them.
Well, guess what? Do you trust Apple? They're building a car. Do you trust Sony? They're building a car. Do you trust Tesla? I mean, these are all new players, and Rivian, brand new players. You may not trust GM, but I'll tell you what, GM's got over 100 years building vehicles. The building vehicle part, they got down, which means they can scale faster than anybody. So can Ford, and to a lesser degree, so can Stellantis. Why? Because the fundamental stuff that Lucid is having trouble with now, they've already got mastered. Now what they're saying is, okay, we're reimagining the propulsion system in these vehicles. We are reimagining what that looks like, how it performs, how it acts, getting cost out, which means going solid state if you're still lithium, and maybe getting away from lithium entirely. And that's the beauty of optimizing a system. And that is why it costs billions of dollars if you're going to play in the big boy sandbox. Why recreate? Why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? That is why, other manufacturers who are coming to market are saying, you know what, GM? Let's make the deal for these components, and we'll spend our money, our time, differentiating our product in performance, differentiating our product in what it looks like, and how the user experience, the driver experience is. We can spend our money there and actually come up with really phenomenal stuff because we didn't have to recreate the wheel with the basic stuff. So it frees them to be totally imaginable, and that is good for the consumer because now the consumer has choice. And with these parts being common, means the cost of the parts go down. The stuff that's critical goes down, and the availability of those components goes up, which is exactly where you want to be. Unfortunately, what it also does, because they've spent so much money and they've, made the commitment, they made the investment, squeezes out everybody else, which means if you do have a problem with them, you're kind of screwed. The only other people right now that are spending that kind of money or even approaching it in terms of infrastructure is Ford. Rivian's created their own. Tesla's created their own. Chances are Apple won't, Sony won't, Fisker won't, and anybody else that wants to come into the market because it makes no economic sense to do it. They're still going to be spending billions of dollars, but not tens of billions. It makes a big difference of whether or not consumers will have choice. So you'll have choice in other ways. Think of how many different ways a vehicle can be imagined. That's what this is going to free up. It's going to free up capital to reimagine transportation because the basics are covered, because they don't have to spend money for basics, because they know if they can track with GM, it's so much a vehicle, whether it's 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 to give you this basic. And honestly, that's no different of what truck makers have been doing for years and what they call upfitting, or RV makers, because you start with a big 3 chassis and then they put their stuff on the back of it. That's been going on for decades. So that's not new. All it is, it's new at this application. And with GM getting ready to announce being able to offer these kits for people to upgrade their vintage vehicles to electric, that's exciting. Now, GM has not announced which vehicles, and they haven't announced what the cost would be. But right now, it would not be an easy conversion still. And you're going to have somebody who knows what they're doing. And it's going to cost you some money. But the fact they're even wading into this, if they get economies of scale, they could drop the price for that. So that you can have a really cool vintage car that doesn't pollute at all. And actually has better performance than the vehicle did when it was new. Imagine that.
I'd be interested to see how many care, but I hope they do.
Oh, I think more people than you imagine. That they like the vestiges of a vintage vehicle, but don't like all the particulars of the internal combustion engine and the inefficient powertrain compared to now. Because anything back 50 years ago is inefficient every kind of way. Performance, fuel economy, control, idling, everything compared to what we're building today. And the electric motors are even better. So I'm excited about it. Again, I'm not surprised. And here's the thing. We're not talking about millions of units. We're in the tens of thousands of units of potential conversions. But again, the GM approach is, blanket everything. Blanket everything. And that makes sense because the more units they can spread their technology over, it drops the cost and makes it more affordable and makes other automakers be able to do some phenomenal things that they wouldn't have been able to do if they had to build this from scratch themselves. Unfortunately, though, it does make them beholden to GM. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending, how many billion you want to spend to reinvent the wheel, and you might not be as good. So that's an issue to consider. And each manufacturer will consider that as they come to market. Because like I've said before, this is like 120 years ago when the industry started. There's a lot of people in the industry and out of the industry coming into the marketplace.
And that brings us to the end of our program.